Saluton, mia kamaradoj. A few weeks ago, I was watching a YouTuber that I recently found called How to Activism, and he released a video on a language called Esperanto that I had never heard of a few weeks ago. Esperanto is a constructed language invented in the late 1800s by Dr. Zamenhof. And unlike English, it's actually fit to be an international language of the proletariat. But if you ask me honestly, I say not only the proletariat, but the entire world. Esperanto is based on a multitude of language ranging from Spanish, German, I think a little bit of Polish, some Italian, and I think some English as well. Although I can't really tell if the words that sound like English are actually just German in origin. So, why learn Esperanto? What makes it, quote, the international language, unlike English, which many people claim is the international language? Esperanto works entirely around a system of prefixes and suffixes, which leads to a learner having to learn far fewer words. Real quickly, I'll go over just a handful of words to kind of dip your toes into this language. The word for warm in Esperanto is varma. Also, forgive me if I mispronounce anything. I've only been learning this language for about 3 weeks. And to get the word for cold, you just slap the prefix for opposite on it, which is mal. And then you end up with malvarma, meaning cold. Or I guess if you wanted to directly translate it, it would mean opposite warm. The word sana means healthy. Malsana is sick. The word arbo is tree. But if you add the suffix for group, it becomes arbaro, which means forest. Adding a J to the end of a noun makes it plural, arboi. This word can refer to just a group of trees rather than a forest, maybe 2 or 3. And just to show you how consistent conjugation is, this is the word for word, vorto. This is the word for words, vortoi. And this is the word for dictionary, vortaro, literally meaning group of words. And here's where I will address some of people's biggest complaints about this language, and my view on these complaints and why I think they're not that valid of complaints. I think the biggest and most consistent complaint I ever see with Esperanto in the case of it being an international auxiliary language is that it is far too Eurocentric, and I understand that complaint. It is very Eurocentric. However, and just a heads up, if you interpret this in bad faith, it might sound like I'm trying to justify imperialism, but hold with me here. Esperanto as a language and its vocabulary is highly based off of Romance languages, and also Germanic languages to an extent, but more so Romance languages, I feel like. And due to the history of imperialism with such countries as Italy, very much so with France and Spain, these Romance languages are spoken pretty widely throughout the world. And as we can see, Romance languages are widely spoken, even in Africa, South America, and don't quote me on this because I'm not some sort of Southeast Asia history expert, but I'm also pretty sure that you can still hear some French in places like Vietnam, but don't quote me on that. I've never left America. And so we see that a lot of Africa, and in a historical context, even East Asia and Southeast Asia have had exposures to Romance languages. Therefore, for a lot of these countries, and less so for East Asia, but more so for Africa, especially the French-speaking countries, this language would be pretty relatively easy to catch on to. And even though I said East Asians might actually have a harder time learning this language because of its Eurocentric origins, it actually seems like they don't really struggle with it too much. Esperanto has a very long history in Japan, dating back well over 100 years. I've even heard that the grammar in Esperanto is pretty similar to that of Chinese grammar, but don't quote me on that. I don't speak Chinese. But as you can see on this map, it's pretty widespread. This language is spoken in quite a few different areas. And the places where it isn't spoken kind of make sense, like in Africa or in the Middle East, where I would imagine resources on learning this language might not be as plentiful as it is in places like America, Europe, Japan, Korea, China. Also, here's a little fact before I move on. In Japan, there is a religion called Omoto, based off of the traditional Japanese religion Shinto. And while I can't go over all the beliefs of Omoto, they consider Esperanto to be somewhat of a spiritual language to them. Here is actually a monument erected by followers of Omoto. It reads, "One God, one world, one international language." Or roughly something like that. So I think that even if it is Eurocentric, Romance languages are widely spoken enough to where that might not be as big of a problem. Also, with the grammar being so easy and you having to learn such few words due to prefixes and suffixes, it just makes way more sense for this to be the international language than English does. And another reason I think we should try to pursue this being the international language is it's already spoken by millions of people. It's spoken roughly somewhere in the range of 100,000 people to 2 million people. No one really knows. Especially since Duolingo actually released their Esperanto course, which I highly recommend you check out if you want to learn this language. It's really useful. I fucking kid you not, it's such an easy language that you can learn it on Duolingo, and once you complete the tree, you can basically hop out into the world and start talking to people in Esperanto. Though, if I'm trying to be more accurate with it, I'd say probably around the range of 100,000 people speak it pretty fluently, and the rest are intermediate to beginners. That is, if they actually pursued learning the language long term. So let's say you complete the Duolingo tree. How do you start using Esperanto? I mean, it's not native to any country, so what country do you go to? And here's the kicker. Pretty much any. Yeah, pretty much any. Thanks to the service for Esperantists called Pasporta Servo, you can travel internationally and meet Esperanto speakers abroad. Pasporta Servo, if I had to dumb it down, is basically kind of couch hopping for Esperantists. I don't know exactly how it works because I've never used it myself, though I plan on using it to visit other countries in the future, especially those in Asia. But to my understanding, you just contact these people and set up your stay with them, and you use Esperanto, you practice Esperanto, and there you go. I'd say it even offers a more natural cultural experience of visiting a new country than going there without learning any language. So let's say you want to experience Japanese culture or Korean culture. You just meet someone from there that speaks that language and you can communicate with them and they can teach you about their culture in a better way than if you two didn't have a language in common. Which is really nice because the actual goal of Esperanto was to limit misunderstandings that language barriers actually cause, and it works. Whereas with other language, you'll have to invest thousands of hours studying and learning new words and grammar. With Esperanto, someone that speaks English natively, like I assume you either speak English natively or pretty well if you're watching this video as it's in English, you can learn it in roughly 150 hours. I personally have been learning it since about New Year's, and I've already had some pretty great conversations with people from all over the world, especially on Twitter. Twitter has a thriving Esperanto community. So now that I've covered the Eurocentric complaint and the complaint that you can't really ever use it because it's, quote, not useful, I'll tackle the last complaint. That being, there is no genuine culture or art in Esperanto. Which is honestly simply just not true. There's original movies, there's movies translated into Esperanto, there's original books, there's original music, there's books translated into Esperanto, and music translated into Esperanto. There are tons of art in Esperanto. Personally, some of my favorite Esperanto art is some of the socialist art that came out of the Esperanto movement. Oh, come on. This is a socialist channel. Of course I was going to get around to this. Songs such as La Internazio, or The Internationale. I've found Bella Ciao in Esperanto. And also just a wide array of different socialist and anarchist music in this language. There is simply just too much history for me to cover on this language on this channel right now. So perhaps one day I'll make more videos on the history of Esperanto, especially relating to the political sides of Esperanto. But for right now, I have some recommendations for you. In the description of this video will be various resources. Also, there will be a link to How to Activism's video on Esperanto. Also, I'm going to leave a link to this channel. He's my favorite Esperanto channel. He just kind of makes vlogs and talks about Esperanto. He's also made some videos on the history of Esperanto in the past, which I highly recommend checking out. Also, yeah, you're reading that video title right. There are native Esperanto speakers now. There's roughly in the range of about 1,000 to 2,000. I'm also going to drop a link to lernu.net, which is a very popular Esperanto site. Other than that, pretty much the only sources I use are Facebook groups where people actively speak Esperanto and Twitter. I use the flashcard app Anki to remember words and sentences. And I'm also personally still working my way through the Duolingo Esperanto tree. So, comrades, I hope that you consider learning this language and joining this community. It's a very accepting, vibrant community with a lot going on right now. That's going to be it for me today. Hopefully I can start uploading more frequently. I recently went through a lot of really bad stuff, and I'm trying to get back in the swing of things, but hopefully this video was a nice kind of return for a bit. Anyways, I'm the Tolerant Left. Stay classless.